April 15th, 1984. Torrential rain falls from the sky. As the early evening approaches the City Line section of East New York, Brooklyn. East New York at that time was an area that law enforcement referred to as the Killing Fields. Inside 1080 Liberty Avenue, 11 family members are gathered in the first floor apartment of a two-story home. Some seated around the living room, eating and watching television. Others occupying bedrooms in the apartment. It's Palm Sunday, the first day of the Holy Week leading up to Easter. Just 4 blocks from 1080 Liberty Avenue, parishioners of St. Sylvester's Catholic Church came and went throughout the day in celebration of Christ's entry into Jerusalem. As the New York City streets become slick and the water violently rushes along the curb, sweeping up all the filth in its path and depositing itself into the New York City sewer system, a man makes his way down Liberty Avenue and enters the address of 1080. Soon, the carnage he would leave behind would be something the likes of New York City had never seen before. This is the story of the Palm Sunday Massacre. "7:19 p.m. Homeowner Enrique Bermudez enters the first floor dwelling of 1080 Liberty Avenue. He prepares to greet his pregnant girlfriend, 2 children, and various family members. In seconds, he's outside the residence, screaming and crying hysterically. Next door at Rossi Bread Bakery, owner Carmine Rossi runs out of his shop and asks Enrique what had happened. He makes his way back into the apartment with Enrique and witnesses a bloody carnage. They find Betsy Bermudez, age 14, Marilyn Bermudez, age 10, daughters of Enrique Bermudez, Virginia Lopez, age 24, pregnant girlfriend of Enrique Bermudez, Eddie Lopez, age 7, and Juan Enrique Lopez, age 4, sons of Virginia Lopez, Carmen Perez, age 20, Albert Maldonado and Noel Maldonado, both 3 years old, children of Carmen Perez, Migdalia Perez, age 14, sister of Carmen Perez, and Maria Isabel Perez, age 10, niece of Carmen Perez. They have all been shot dead at close range. Bakery owner Carmine Rossi finds an infant crying amongst the horror. It's 11-month-old Christina Rivera, another child of Carmen Perez, and the lone survivor of the massacre. He picks her up and makes his way out to call the police. When the officers of the 75th Precinct arrive, they are in utter shock. They witness what they refer to at the time as the largest mass slaying in the New York metropolitan area in recent memory. Soon, Mayor Ed Koch gets word of the massacre and makes his way over. He's visibly unnerved as he takes in the situation. It's obviously a massacre. There were 10 people killed, shot in the head, he stated, as he walks away, not in the mood for further questioning. Detectives start investigating the area and questioning neighbors. This is when 2 neighbors say that they heard a constant popping sound coming from the apartment at around 5:30 p.m. Law enforcement start putting together a timeline. In a statement to the press, Commissioner Ward said no weapons were found inside the home. However, they did find items commonly used in drug manufacturing. Powdered lactose, which is a milk sugar commonly used to dilute heroin, glassine envelopes, and a foil commonly used to wrap narcotics was also found. The 75th Precinct assembles a massive task force of detectives to investigate the tragedy, which would be led by Lieutenant Herbert Homan. One detective being Richard Bo Dietl, a hard-nosed cop who grew up on the streets of Ozone Park, Queens, around the likes of mobsters like John Gotti and Joey Scopo. His fellow law enforcement officers often described him as the closest thing New York had to Dirty Harry. Dietl called into the 75th Precinct that night and asked if anything was going on. After being informed of the situation, he made his way over to Liberty Avenue and immediately got involved in the case. Police would receive leads for weeks, as their assumptions as to why this would have happened mounted. Was it a random event? Could it have been the acts of a drug organization? Perhaps a cartel, due to the vicious nature of the crime. Then, in May of 1984, a tip comes into the police station. A man who worked at a 911 call center would inform detectives that Enrique Bermudez, the man who owned the residence at 1080 Liberty Avenue and lost numerous family members that day, was involved in drug dealing. He would also tell detectives that a man by the name of Christopher Thomas was the likely culprit in the mass homicide. It turns out that Enrique Bermudez was no stranger to the drug game. In 1976, he was convicted for selling a half ounce of cocaine and sentenced to 5 to 15 years in prison. He would be released on parole in 1981 and would also become a police informant. All signs pointed to Enrique falling back into the drug game. Enrique is brought in for questioning and is granted immunity from any activities that he may have been partaking in. The most important thing for law enforcement is solving this crime and getting a mass murderer off the streets of New York City. Police pull Enrique in for questioning and ask him if he thought he did business with anyone that may have been capable of perpetrating this massacre. Enrique admits to detectives that he was in fact dealing cocaine. Then he says that a man by the name of Christopher Thomas owed him $7,000. He also stated that on the morning of April 14th, the day before the massacre, Christopher Thomas broke into his apartment because he thought Enrique was having an affair with his estranged wife. This would be the second time that Christopher's name would come up. In investigating Christopher Thomas, police found out that he has a history of multiple arrests. In 1970, Christopher Thomas was arrested for shooting his girlfriend. He would spend 3 years in prison for the assault. In 1982, he would go to trial for the murder of a woman in a New Jersey hotel room, but he would beat the charges. 7 days before the massacre, Christopher is arrested again for assaulting his girlfriend. After 3 days in jail, he is released on bail. Detective Bo Dietl and his partner Jimmy McAlvin decide to pay a visit to Christopher Thomas's girlfriend's apartment in the Bronx, where they suspect Thomas is hiding. In Bo Dietl's podcast, One Tough Podcast, he speaks about much of the details of this case. Detectives' first encounter with Thomas goes as follows. Detectives Dietl and McAllen make their way over to the apartment building. A woman answers the door. "We're from the 44th Precinct here in the Bronx. We're looking for Christopher Thomas." "He's not here. What's this about?" the woman says. "You tell him he better stay away from those washing machines downstairs. He better stop breaking in and stealing all those damn quarters." Obviously, the detectives weren't from the Bronx precinct at all, but they couldn't expose their real motives, so they came up with a ruse. They leave the apartment and walk towards their vehicle, when all of a sudden, a man runs up behind them and says, "I'm Christopher Thomas. I wasn't breaking into any of them washing machines." Detective Dietl states, "If I gotta come back here, I'm gonna kick your ass. You stay away from them damn washing machines." The detectives pull off, but can't shake the appearance of Thomas. His eyes rolling around, and his mannerisms off-putting. They get into the car, and Detective Dietl looks over to Detective McAllen. He states, "That's gotta be our guy. That guy's a psychopath." However, they still needed more. Detectives make their way over to an apartment that was previously occupied by Thomas. In the apartment, they find a round that matches the rounds found from the gun used in the massacre on Liberty Avenue. They soon return back to Liberty Avenue in order to question any possible witnesses to the crime. They find a young kid hanging around by the residence. He says that he saw someone leaving the home at 1080 Liberty Avenue around the time that the crime occurred. They show him photos of different men, one being Christopher Thomas. The kid points to the image of Thomas and states, "That looks like him." They finally have enough to collar Christopher Thomas. However, he's nowhere to be found. They soon find out that he's already in custody. He's at the Bronx House of Detention, being held on a sexual assault charge. The target of his assault? His own mother. They bring the kid who says he saw Thomas that day, and they place Thomas in a lineup amongst other men. Christopher Thomas is ultimately picked out of the lineup. On Tuesday, June 19th, 1984, 34-year-old Christopher Thomas is charged with the April 15th Palm Sunday massacre of 10 people at 1080 Liberty Avenue. Christopher Thomas is taken from the Bronx House of Detention and brought to the 75th Precinct in East New York. Police would notify press that he was the lone suspect and used 2 guns that day, which fired a total of 19 bullets. They also stated that Christopher Thomas was motivated by a jealous rage because he thought Enrique Bermudez was sleeping with his estranged wife. The press also inquired as to how one man could have done such a thing on his own. Police Commissioner Benjamin Ward said that Thomas knew Enrique's family for at least a year at that time. He also made note that even though there were 10 people murdered, only 2 of them were adults. Christopher Thomas would be hauled out of the 75th Precinct, where a large crowd of press and community members awaited. The crowd screamed, and the jeers filled the air as the city got a look at the suspected mass murderer. Christopher Thomas would be held in an extreme protective custody ward on Rikers Island. It's a section reserved for notorious criminals. During the trial of Christopher Thomas, which began in July of 1985, some interesting details would come to light. For one, it was established that Enrique Bermudez and Christopher Thomas knew each other well and were drug-dealing partners. Another interesting and sad detail involved one of the guns used in the massacre. It turned out that the .38 caliber revolver originally came from Enrique Bermudez, who gave it to Thomas for protection against someone who Thomas feared. Little did Bermudez know that gun would be used to murder his own family. Assistant District Attorney Christopher Ulrich would also submit witness testimony that stated Christopher Thomas was seen with a flight bag containing cocaine taken from the murder scene and 2 guns, one being the .38 caliber revolver and the other being a .22 caliber pistol. Assistant DA Christopher Ulrich would also submit evidence which said a jailhouse informant by the name of Jeffrey Ford told authorities that Christopher Thomas admitted his role in the massacre, but also told him that he had an accomplice, a man which he only identified as Lenny. However, this so-called accomplice was never found, and it seemed that Thomas was attempting to take some heat off himself. Thomas's lawyer, Martin Schmuckler, would refute the jailhouse informant's testimony and claim that he was intentionally placed near Thomas by authorities in order to gain information. It turned out that Jeffrey Ford had acted as an informant in the past, but according to authorities, he was not an informant at that time and was only in Thomas's ward because he had been exposed as a jailhouse rat. Ultimately, the testimony of Jeffrey Ford would be allowed into the trial. Later on, in the month of July 1985, Christopher Thomas would be cleared of murder charges. It was decided by the jury that Thomas was extremely emotionally disturbed and under the influence of a serious cocaine habit. On September 10th, 1985, Christopher Thomas was sentenced to a maximum of 250 years in prison. But according to the Brooklyn District Attorney's Office at that time, Christopher Thomas, who was guilty of 10 counts of manslaughter, which was a Class B felony, would only be liable to serve 25 to 50 years in prison. In handing out his sentence, New York State Supreme Court Justice Ronald Aiello told Thomas, "It is this court's intention that you serve every day, every hour, every minute of the minimum sentence I impose on you. Don't let him out. That is my message to the New York State Parole Board. Your judgment day today is on earth. Your next judgment day will be with the good Lord. Today is a piece of cake, Mr. Thomas, compared to your final judgment day." The Palm Sunday Massacre, a strange case of murder, jealousy, drugs, and rage, had come to an end. A dangerous killer and repeat offender was off the streets, and the city hoped this would be the last time that they would ever hear of Christopher Thomas. New York Times, March 2018. The man who killed 10 people in the largest mass shooting in New York City in decades was released from prison earlier this year. The killer, Christopher Thomas, shot 8 children and 2 women in a home in Brooklyn in 1984, a crime that became known as the Palm Sunday Massacre. It turns out that the man who committed one of New York City's largest mass homicides in history was quietly released in January of 2018. No press, no fanfare. As I mentioned previously, this New York Times article is from March of 2018, a couple of months after Thomas's release. Even the likes of Bo Dietl, the hard-nosed detective who helped break the case, didn't know that Thomas had been released. Bo Dietl retired in 1985, a year after the Palm Sunday Massacre, and in 1986, he was nominated for Congress, but did not manage to get a seat. He became the subject of the 1988 book One Tough Cop, and the 1998 movie of the same title. He's a well-known media figure and runs Bo Dietl and Associates, a private investigative firm located in Manhattan. If that's not enough, he ran for mayor of New York City in 2017 and holds a table at famed Rayo's restaurant in East Harlem. In talking to the press, Bo Dietl stated, "I can't believe that 10 souls can never be alive again. 8 children, and he's out? Where is the justice for those kids? Where is the justice? They will never have another Easter. He's allowed to go free and enjoy himself? That's not right. Numerous politicians, like New York State Senator Marty Golden, who represents Brooklyn's 22nd District, and Assemblywomen like Nicole Malliotakis, were also extremely dismayed with the decision to have Thomas released. They would even present a bill attempting to stop such releases from happening in the future. Till this day, Christopher Thomas walks free. Where he is, who knows? He'll be on parole till 2034. Just one more thing before we go. Because despite all the darkness involved in this case, there's still one beam of hope and light that came out of it. A light that still shines bright today. Pictured here on the New York Post is police officer Joanne Jaffe. She's holding the only survivor of the massacre, Christina Rivera. She was one of the responding officers that night. If the name Joanne Jaffe sounds familiar to you, well, that's because me and Manny Grossman covered her in our video, The Cold and Curious Case of Leslie Zarrett. Officer Jaffe was assigned with looking after Christina Rivera that night, and she never left her side since. She became Christina Rivera's benefactor, and when Christina was 14, she moved in with Officer Jaffe, who became a police chief and had a very successful career in law enforcement. When Christina Rivera turned 30, Joanna Jaffe officially adopted her. A beautiful ending to a sad tale. Now let's head over to the City Line section of East New York, Brooklyn, and check it out.
Alright everybody, it's an early Sunday morning. We are in the City Line section of East New York. We're on Liberty Avenue. We're heading to 1080 Liberty. It is freezing, but I'll survive. All right, look at some graffitos. If anybody needs a couch. All right, so we're gonna cross the street over here. As I said, we're on Liberty Avenue, East New York. And this is for the video I did prior to this, if you watched, on the Palm Sunday Massacre, which occurred in the early evening hours of April 15th, 1984. Palm Sunday. There's Joe's Pizza. I've never been there, but I hear it's very good. I don't think they're open this early, or else I would grab a slice. So we're gonna go look at 1080 Liberty because the building is still there. It is now a business on the bottom floor. We're gonna check out what that business is. All right. Liberty Avenue. All right. take our stroll. Nice and steady. All right, keep it moving. So I hope you enjoyed the story before this. It's definitely a twisted tale. Christopher Thomas, who entered the apartment ground floor of 1080 Liberty and took the lives of 8 teens and children and 2 adults. Very sad. And then all the craziness that came after, with Bermudez's connections to Thomas, with the gun, with the drugs, and all the stuff with the cops that happened. It's a real New York story. So, right there, where it says La Nacional, which is some kind of money orders, documents. I guess it's some kind of, I don't know, maybe passports, documentations, phone cards, yeah, stuff like that. So let's go over there. And as always, I'll put, pictures of what it used to look like. I mean, it's pretty much the same. Right there where it says Sneaker Net used to be the bread bakery, where the owner came out when he saw Enrique screaming out front. And this place was flooded with police. Mayor Koch came by, and it was the worst mass shooting that they had seen at that time in New York City, at least that they could report in the modern era. So let's cross over and check out the building here. This building here, 1080 Liberty, in this ground floor apartment where this store is now. I don't think these stairs were here at the time. So now we have an office here. Alright, so I'm back across the street now. There's not much of a sidewalk here. The building is kind of like right on top of the sidewalk, so it's kind of hard to film, plus with the glare of that glass. But once again, right there where it says La Nacional, 1080 Liberty. And on April 14th of '84, according to Bermudez, that was the first time Christopher Thomas had broke in And Bermudez wakes up and finds him, and he's there because he thinks that Bermudez is messing around with his estranged wife. And then by the next day, Thomas comes back a little after 5 and commits the massacre. Then he's on the run for a couple months until they catch him. And they come back and they find a couple of kids hanging out next door, and one of them ends up being a witness, and he identifies Thomas from the photos, and everything happens from there. "1080 Liberty Avenue, the location of the Palm Sunday massacre, right in that ground floor." So not going to be a long video, you know, it's very site specific. Just thought I would come here and let you guys see the area, see the building that is still there. Interesting, when I didn't mention it in the story, but I did find that Bermudez purchased this building not long before the massacre, and he paid about $50,000 for it. And then I think about 10 or 15 years ago, the building sold for $500,000. I don't know if he was still the owner of the building at that time. Certainly would have been a good investment. I don't know if the owner of the building even knew what had happened there. But I don't know if that affects real estate prices, but it's certainly an eerie property to acquire. So let's walk away from here for now. And there's a guy across the street over there. Maybe he'll talk to me. Let's see what happens. All right. So I did speak to the gentleman there. And oddly enough, you know, like when I do these stories, a lot of these things are so forgotten that no one even knows about these things. So I asked him how long he had lived here. He said he'd been here pretty much all his life, but he was born in 1981. And he never heard of it. So once again, this is why I'm doing what I'm doing, man. Shedding light on these forgotten stories here. And of course, demographics change over time. And I think right now there's a large Bangladeshi population here. And of course, you know, Hispanic, Black, you know, it's pretty diverse. But yeah, I'd wager, you know, that most people in this area that have come here now, they've never heard of this stuff. And the reason that I had originally heard of it, I mentioned Bo Dietl extensively in this story. You know, I was listening to his podcast when I first started, One Tough Podcast. He was on a network called Gas Digital Network. He's no longer there. Shout out Gas Digital Network, Legion of Skanks. It's like a comedy and all types of stuff. And yeah, so I got hooked on his podcast. He was talking about all this stuff. And he's a real character, man. This guy's nuts, to be honest with you. He's got the foulest mouth I've ever seen. This little mural for Joe's Pizza. Pretty cool. And so yeah, then I got into the story, and I've been wanting to do it for a very long time, and it's been taking me a while. So let's look down this block real quick. You see all these old buildings here. Once again, I always love when that top part up there, you see that? How that, like, I don't know what you call that, top of these buildings. I love that architecture. So, homesick. That's how I feel right now, freezing my ass off. That's Cast TRU. Little graffiti insight. All right, well, I think once again up top there, you see these old buildings. I think that's it. Like I said, not too long a video on this one. Real site specific. And yeah, so it's cool that, you know, I never been to this particular area. I'm glad that you guys came with me. We got to see where it happened, the Palm Sunday Massacre, the building that's there. You know, if these streets could talk, they would say a lot. But unfortunately, they don't. And the only people that can are the ones that decide to do things like I do, to talk about this stuff and remember the victims and remember the history of these city streets. So that's all, folks. I will see you guys when I see you. And I hope once again that this program was very informative. Everybody have a beautiful week coming up. Stay safe, stay healthy, and I will talk to you on the YouTube.